The air was thick with the stench of burning rubber and blood, and the ground trembled beneath my feet as another explosion tore through the night. I crouched behind a crumbling wall in Sarajevo, 1993, my hands shaking, clutching a medical kit that felt heavier than my own heart. Screams pierced the darkness. Some were cries for help, others just raw, animalistic wails of terror. I was a volunteer medic, barely 23, thrust into the chaos of the Bosnian War. That night, the city was a butcher's block, and I was running toward the wounded, not away. My boots slipped in the mud, mixed with things I didn't dare identify, as I heard a child's voice calling for their mother somewhere in the rubble. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, knowing I couldn't save them all, but I had to try. This is my story. The worst night of my life, when I ran through hell to save as many as I could, only to uncover a truth so dark it still haunts me. What does it mean to be human when the world around you is tearing itself apart? What do you do when every choice you make could be someone's last hope or their final betrayal? These are the questions that claw at me, even now, years later. There's a secret buried in that night. Something I didn't see coming. Something that changed how I view courage, sacrifice, and the cost of survival. Stay with me until the end, because what I learned in those blood-soaked hours might make you question everything you think you know about war. War strips us bare, revealing who we are when there's nothing left to hide behind. It's not just about bullets or bombs, it's about the choices we make when life hangs by a thread. It's about the people who don't make it out, and the ones who do, carrying scars no one can see. As I tell you this, I'm pulling you into that dark tunnel with me, into a place where hope and despair are two sides of the same coin. If you're here, you're not afraid to face the raw truth of what war does to the human soul. Hit that like button to help more people discover these stories, accounts that cut through the noise and show what it means to survive when the world is burning. In the comments, type, "I want to hear the whole truth of this story." By doing that, you're joining a community that refuses to look away, a group of people brave enough to listen to voices that echo from the heart of conflict. Thank you for having the courage to hear me out. What comes next will pull you deeper into that night in Sarajevo, a night where every second felt like a lifetime, and every choice carried a weight I'm still carrying. Stay with me. This is only the beginning. The explosions didn't stop. They came in waves, like a heartbeat pounding through the city, each one shaking loose more dust and despair. I was still crouched behind that crumbling wall, my medical kit pressed against my chest, when I heard it, a cry, sharp and desperate, cutting through the chaos. It wasn't just any cry. It was a child's, high-pitched, raw, calling out for someone, anyone. "Mama, Mama!" The voice was close, maybe 20 meters away, but it felt like a chasm stretched between us. Sarajevo was a maze of shattered buildings and sniper alleys, and every step I took could be my last. But that voice, it clawed at me, pulling me forward like a hook in my gut. I slung the kit over my shoulder and ran, keeping low, my eyes scanning the shadows for movement. The Bosnian War had turned this city into a graveyard, and I was no soldier, just a kid who'd signed up to help because I thought I could make a difference. The streets were slick with rain and worse, and my boots skidded as I rounded a corner. The air smelled of gunpowder and fear. Above me, the sky was a sickly orange, lit by fires burning somewhere in the distance. I followed the sound, my heart hammering, until I saw her. A girl, no older than 8, curled up beside a pile of rubble that used to be a bakery. Her face was streaked with dirt, her eyes wide with terror, and her small hands clutched a torn scarf as if it could protect her. Hey, it's okay," I whispered, dropping to my knees beside her. My voice sounded foreign, shaky, not like the calm medic I was supposed to be. Her name was Amra, she told me later, but in that moment, she was just a trembling bundle of fear. "Where's your mama?" I asked, scanning the debris for any sign of life. She pointed toward the collapsed building, her fingers shaking, and my stomach dropped. The structure was a skeleton of concrete and rebar, its roof caved in, windows blown out. If her mother was in there, the odds weren't good. But I couldn't tell her that, not yet. I grabbed her hand, small and cold in mine, and pulled her behind a slab of concrete for cover. "Stay here," I said, my voice firmer now, though my insides were screaming. "I'm going to look for her." She nodded, her eyes locked on mine, trusting me in a way that felt like a weight I wasn't ready to carry. I crawled toward the rubble, my hands scraping against jagged stone, my ears straining for any sound beneath the distant rumble of artillery. That's when I heard it, a faint moan, barely audible, coming from somewhere deep in the wreckage. Someone was alive in there. I started digging, my fingers bleeding as I clawed at the debris, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The moan grew louder, and I found her, a woman, maybe in her 30s, pinned under a beam. Her face was pale, her lips cracked, but her eyes were open, flickering with life. "Amra," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "My girl." I told her I'd found her daughter, that Amra was safe, and her face softened for a moment, a flicker of relief in the midst of her pain. But the beam was heavy, too heavy for me to lift alone, and blood was pooling beneath her, dark and spreading fast. My medical training kicked in, check for a pulse, assess the injury, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely open my kit. She was bleeding out, and I had minutes, maybe less, to act. I tore open a pack of gauze, pressing it against the gash on her side, but it soaked through almost instantly. "Hold on," I kept saying, to her, to myself, to the universe. "Just hold on." I didn't know if I was talking to her or to Amra, who was still huddled nearby, watching me with those wide, unblinking eyes. I needed help, someone stronger, someone with tools to lift the beam, but the street was empty except for the ghosts of war. The radio on my belt crackled, but the signal was weak, and the other medics were scattered across the city, dealing with their own nightmares. I was alone, and the weight of that realization hit me harder than the explosion still rocking the ground. As I worked, trying to stabilize her, I heard footsteps, quick, deliberate, coming from the alley behind me. My heart lurched. Friend or foe? In Sarajevo, you never knew. Snipers didn't care if you were a medic or a soldier. A red cross on your arm was just a target. I glanced back, my hand instinctively moving to the small knife I kept in my boot. Not that it would do much good. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man, his face half covered by a scarf, his eyes sharp and calculating. He wasn't wearing a uniform, but he carried a rifle slung across his back. "You need help?" he asked, his voice low, accented but calm, like he'd seen 100 scenes like this. I didn't trust him. How could I? But the woman was fading, her pulse weakening under my fingers, and Amra's quiet sobs were echoing in my ears. I nodded, unable to form words, and he knelt beside me, assessing the beam. "We can lift it," he said, "but we have to be fast." There was something in his voice, a certainty that made me believe him, even if every instinct screamed to run. We positioned ourselves, my hands slick with blood and sweat, and counted to 3. The beam groaned as we strained against it, and for a moment, I thought we might actually do it. Save her, reunite her with Amra, be the hero I'd naively thought I could be when I signed up for this. But war doesn't care about heroes. As we lifted, the ground shook again. Another explosion, closer this time, sending a shower of debris raining down. The beam shifted, and the woman screamed, a sound that cut through me like shrapnel. I looked into her eyes, saw the life slipping away, and knew we were running out of time. The man beside me cursed under his breath, his hands steady despite the chaos, and I wondered who he was, what he was doing here, and why he was risking his life for a stranger. That was the first moment I realized there was more to this night than I could see. A puzzle with pieces I didn't yet understand. The beam shifted with a groan that seemed to echo the woman's scream, and for a split second, I thought the whole pile of rubble was going to come crashing down on us. The explosion had been close, too close, sending shards of concrete and dust flying through the air like deadly confetti. My arms burned from the strain, muscles screaming in protest as I heaved with everything I had left. The man beside me, his face grim and set, didn't flinch. He just grunted and pushed harder, his shoulders bunching under the effort. "Now!" he barked. And together we lifted, the wood and metal creaking as it gave way just enough. The woman's leg came free, mangled and bloody, but she was out. She collapsed into a whimper, her body going limp from the pain or shock, I couldn't tell which yet. I dropped to her side immediately, my knees hitting the cold, jagged ground. Amra was there in an instant, crawling over, her small hands reaching for her mother. "Mama! Mama!" she sobbed, burying her face in the woman's shoulder. The mother, her name was Selma, I learned later, managed a weak smile through her gritted teeth, stroking her daughter's hair with a trembling hand. But there was no time for reunions. Blood was everywhere, soaking into the dirt, and I could see the gash on her thigh was deep, probably nicked an artery. My medical kit was open before I even thought about it, my hands moving on autopilot despite the adrenaline surging through me. Gauze, tourniquet, antiseptic, basic stuff, but in that moment, it felt like gold. I tied the tourniquet above the wound, pulling it tight, and she gasped, her eyes rolling back. "Stay with me, Selma," I said, using her name even though I didn't know it yet. It just felt right. Making her human, not just another victim. The man stood watch, his rifle now in his hands, scanning the darkened street. "We can't stay here," he muttered, his voice low and urgent. "Snipers. They'll pick us off like rats." I nodded, not looking up, focused on packing the wound. The kit was light, too light. We'd been short on supplies for weeks, ever since the siege tightened its grip on Sarajevo. No electricity, no clean water, hospitals running on generators that sputtered out half the time. I'd heard stories from other medics about operating by candlelight, cutting into flesh with whatever tools they could scrounge, dentists' drills and kitchen knives. Here I was in the open with bombs falling and a child watching her mother bleed out. I improvised, tearing a strip from my own shirt to reinforce the bandage, pressing hard to staunch the flow. It wasn't pretty, but it would hold, for now. Selma's pulse was thready under my fingers, weak but there. Shock was setting in, her skin clammy and pale in the faint glow from distant fires. I rummaged for morphine, but the vial was empty. Damn it, I'd used the last on a soldier earlier that day. "This is going to hurt," I warned her, but she just nodded, her eyes locked on Amra. The girl was quiet now, her tears silent, as if she understood the gravity without words. I cleaned the wound as best I could with what little saline I had left, the sting making Selma arch her back in agony. She bit down on her scarf to muffle the cries, not wanting to scare her daughter more. That act alone, that quiet strength, hit me like a punch. In the midst of this hell, mothers were still mothers, protecting even when they were the ones broken. The man knelt down again, helping me lift Selma onto a makeshift stretcher, really just a door we'd pried from the rubble nearby. "There's a clinic in Dobrynya," he said, his accent thick, local. "But it's across Sniper Alley, risky." I knew the place. It was one of the few still operating, staffed by doctors who'd turned basements into operating rooms. They'd saved thousands, operating under fire, with shells hitting the building and patients screaming in the dark. But getting there meant crossing open ground, where Bosnian Serb snipers perched on the hills, picking off anyone who dared move. Civilians, medics, kids, it didn't matter. I'd lost friends that way. Gunned down while carrying the wounded, we had no choice. "Let's go," I said, grabbing one end of the door. He took the other, and Amra walked beside us, holding her mother's hand. The street was a gauntlet, buildings gutted on either side, cars burned out and flipped like toys. Every step echoed in my head, my ears straining for the crack of a rifle. The air was thick with smoke, burning my lungs, and the ground uneven, forcing us to move slowly. Selma moaned with each jolt, her face twisted in pain. I whispered encouragements, lies really, "We're almost there, hold on." Anything to keep her fighting. The man was silent, his eyes darting everywhere, rifle ready. Who was he? A fighter? A civilian like me? In Sarajevo, lines blurred. Everyone was surviving, some with guns, others with hope. Halfway across it happened. A whistle, then impact. A bullet ricocheted off the pavement inches from my foot, sparking. "Down!" the man yelled, and we dropped, shielding Selma with our bodies. Amra screamed, curling into a ball. Another shot, this one hitting the door, splintering wood. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. Snipers. They'd spotted us, toys in their scope. I glanced at the man. He was firing back, short bursts into the darkness, covering us. "Run!" he shouted, and we did, dragging the stretcher, my arms numb but pumping. Selma's blood trailed behind us, a dark line in the mud. We made it to cover, panting, behind a shattered wall. Selma was fading, her breathing shallow. I checked the wound, bleeding again, the bandage soaked. I pressed harder, my hands red and sticky. "Don't you dare leave her," I muttered to whatever god was listening. Amra was whispering to her mother, telling her stories of before the war, picnics and laughter, a world that felt like a dream now. The man's face was hard, but there was something in his eyes. Regret? "I know a shortcut," he said finally. "Through the back alleys. Less open." I nodded, trusting him because what else could I do? But as we moved, I caught a glimpse of his arm, a tattoo, faded, of a unit insignia. He wasn't just a civilian. He was one of them? No, couldn't be. Or could he? The thought gnawed at me as we pressed on, the night closing in with more secrets than I could handle. The clinic was a beacon, faint lights from candles flickering through boarded windows. We burst through the door, shouting for help. Nurses and doctors swarmed, their faces weary but resolute. They took Selma to the back, a basement room where they operated by whatever light they could muster. I collapsed against the wall, Amra clinging to me, her small body shaking. The man lingered for a moment, then slipped out without a word. Who was he? Why help us? In that chaos, acts of humanity came from the strangest places, but they always carried a price. As I waited for news on Selma, hearing the distant rumble of more artillery, I realized this night was far from over, and the truths it held were just beginning to unfold. The clinic's basement was a dimly lit cavern of suffering, the air heavy with the metallic tang of blood and the sharp bite of antiseptic that couldn't quite mask the rot of infection. Candle flames danced on makeshift tables, casting long shadows that twisted like ghosts across the walls. I sat on the cold concrete floor, Amra curled up against me, her head on my lap, her breathing shallow but steady as exhaustion finally claimed her. The doctors had whisked Selma away behind a curtain of hanging sheets, their voices muffled but urgent, words like hemorrhage and transfusion floating through the air like bad omens. I stared at the blood on my hands, dried now into dark cracks across my skin, and wondered how many more stains this night would add to my soul. Outside, the artillery continued its relentless symphony, each boom rattling the foundations, sending fine dust sifting from the ceiling. The clinic was in Dobrynya, a neighborhood that had become a fortress of sorts, ringed by barricades of sandbags and burned-out vehicles. It wasn't much, but it was a sanctuary in the siege, one of the few places where the wounded could find a sliver of hope. I'd volunteered here before, helping with triage, learning on the fly how to stitch wounds and set bones from doctors who'd seen too much. But tonight felt different, heavier, as if the war had decided to concentrate all its fury on this one endless stretch of darkness. A nurse, her face lined with fatigue, emerged from behind the sheets, wiping her hands on a rag that was more red than white. "She's stable for now," she said, her voice a whisper to not wake the others sprawled on cots around us. "Lost a lot of blood, but we got the artery. She needs rest, and so do you." I nodded, relief washing over me like a cool wave, but it was short-lived. Amra stirred, murmuring in her sleep, and I stroked her hair, trying to offer comfort I barely felt myself. Who would take care of them now? The shelters were overflowing, food scarce, and winter was coming, bringing with it the added cruelty of cold that killed as surely as bullets. As the nurse turned away, the door above us burst open and a group of men stumbled in, carrying 2 stretchers between them. The wounded were soldiers, or what was left of them, uniforms torn, faces blackened with soot. One had a chest wound, bubbling with each ragged breath, the other missing part of his leg, a tourniquet barely holding back the flood. "Incoming!" someone shouted, and the clinic erupted into motion. Doctors barked orders, nurses scrambled for supplies, and I found myself on my feet, pulling Amra to a corner out of the way. "I can help," I said to no one in particular, my voice cutting through the din. The head doctor, a grizzled man named Dr. Kovac, glanced at me and nodded. "Gloves over there. Assist with the chest." I snapped on the latex. Miraculously, they still had some, and dove in. The soldier's name was Marko, I overheard, a defender from the Bosnian army, caught in an ambush on the front lines. His ribs were exposed, shrapnel embedded like cruel jewels, and his lungs were collapsing. Dr. Kovac worked with steady hands, inserting a tube to drain the fluid while I held pressure on the bleeders. Blood spurted, warm and sticky, soaking through my gloves, and Marco's eyes met mine, wild with pain. "Tell my brother," he gasped, but the words trailed off into a cough that sprayed red mist. I leaned closer. "Save your strength," but he shook his head, insistent. "He's in the hills, fighting for them. Tell him I forgive." The words hit me like a stray bullet. Them, meaning the Serbs? A brother on the other side? In this war, families were torn apart, loyalties divided by lines drawn on maps by politicians safe in their offices. I'd heard stories, brothers shooting at brothers, neighbors turning on neighbors. But hearing it from a dying man made it real, visceral. Dr. Kovac didn't flinch. He just kept working, his face a mask of concentration. "Focus," he muttered to me, and I did, clamping a vessel, watching as the bleeding slowed. Marco survived the procedure, barely, drifting into a morphine haze, but his words lingered, a seed of unease planting itself in my mind. Meanwhile, the other wounded man wasn't so lucky. His screams filled the basement as they tried to amputate what was left of his leg, but infection had set in too deep, his body too weak from days without proper food. He passed with a final shudder, his hand clutching a photo of a woman and child, now smeared with his blood. The nurse covered him with a sheet, her movements mechanical, numb from repetition. How many had we lost tonight? How many more? I stepped back, stripping off my gloves, my stomach churning. Amra was awake now, watching wide-eyed from the corner, and I went to her, kneeling down. "It's okay," I lied, pulling her close. But nothing was okay. The war had turned us all into survivors or statistics, and the line between was razor thin. As the chaos subsided for a moment, Dr. Kovac pulled me aside. "That man who helped you, the one with the rifle. You know him?" I shook my head, describing the tattoo I'd glimpsed, a faded eagle or something military. Kovac's face darkened. "Sounds like Chetnik Inc.? Serb paramilitary. Why would he help?" The question hung there, unanswered, twisting my gut. Had he been a spy? Or something worse? In Sarajevo, trust was a luxury we couldn't afford, yet I'd let him carry Selma, lead us through the alleys. What if it was a setup? Paranoia crept in, fueled by the endless night. Before I could dwell, another explosion rocked the building, closer than before, lights flickering as the generator sputtered. Shouts from above, "Incoming wounded!" and the cycle began anew. I grabbed fresh supplies, my body moving on instinct, but my mind racing. Selma was resting in the back, Amra by her side now, but the clinic was filling up, cots overflowing onto the floor. I treated a young boy with a burned arm from a stove explosion, cooking over open flames since gas lines were cut, and an elderly woman hit by stray fire while queuing for water. Each story was a thread in the tapestry of suffering, each face a mirror of my own growing despair. Through it all, I couldn't shake the man's image, his calm in the storm, his unexplained aid. As I bandaged wounds and distributed what little painkillers we had, whispers reached me from other volunteers, rumors of infiltrators, of betrayals from within. Was he one? Or was he a defector, seeking redemption in the chaos? The night pressed on, the basement a pressure cooker of emotions, and I felt the weight of every life I touched, every decision I made. Little did I know the answers were coming, wrapped in more blood and fire, pulling me deeper into the heart of this nightmare. The whispers in the clinic grew louder as the night wore on, blending with the moans of the wounded and the occasional crack of gunfire outside. I wiped sweat from my brow with the back of my arm, leaving a streak of grime, and turned back to the task at hand, sorting through what remained of our supplies. Bandages were running low, antibiotics a distant memory, and the morphine we'd scrounged from abandoned pharmacies was down to a few precious vials. Dr. Kovac moved like a shadow among the cots, checking pulses, adjusting IVs made from salvaged tubing and gravity-fed bags. His eyes were hollow, carved out by months of this siege, but they still burned with a fierce determination that kept us all going. "We do what we can," he'd say, over and over, like a mantra against the madness. Amra had fallen asleep again beside her mother, Selma's hand resting protectively on her head, even in unconsciousness. I watched them for a moment, envying that small bubble of peace amidst the storm. Selma's color was better, the transfusion from a willing donor, one of the soldiers who dragged himself in earlier, seeming to hold. But infection was the real enemy here, lurking in every unclean wound, every breath of dust-laden air. I'd seen it claim lives that bullets spared, turning strong men into fevered wrecks overnight. As I repacked my kit, readying for whatever came next, a volunteer named Lena approached, her face pale under the candlelight. She was local, a teacher before the war turned classrooms into shelters. "You saw that man? The one who brought you in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, the unease from Kovac's words still churning in my gut. "What about him?" Lena glanced around, as if the walls had ears, and in Sarajevo, they might as well have. "I've heard things. Tattoos like that? They're from the old Yugoslav army, but twisted now, used by the paramilitaries up in the hills. Chetniks, they call themselves, waving flags of hate." She paused, her eyes flicking to the door. "But why help? Unless—" She trailed off, but I knew what she meant. Unless he was scouting, marking the clinic for a strike, or worse, poisoning our fragile trust. Paranoia was as rampant as the shelling. Neighbors accused neighbors, and friendships fractured under suspicion. I'd arrived as an outsider, a foreigner with a backpack and ideals, but even I felt it now, that creeping doubt poisoning every interaction. Before I could respond, the ground shook violently. Not from distant artillery, but something closer, fiercer. Dust rained from the ceiling, and screams erupted as patients jolted awake. "Mortar!" someone yelled, and we all hit the floor, covering heads with arms, as if that could protect us from the sky falling. The impact was deafening, a roar that vibrated through my bones, followed by the crash of masonry above. The clinic's upper floor took the hit, and I could hear debris tumbling down the stairs. Smoke seeped through the cracks, acrid and choking, and the generator finally gave out, plunging us into near darkness, broken only by flickering candles. "Everyone stay down!" Dr. Kovac bellowed, crawling toward the wounded to shield them. I grabbed Amra, pulling her under a table, her eyes wide with fresh terror. "It's okay, it's just thunder," I lied again, holding her tight as another round whistled in. This one struck nearby, shaking the foundations, and I felt the building groan like a wounded animal. Mortars were indiscriminate killers, lobbed from the hills to terrorize, to break spirits as much as bodies. The Serb forces encircling the city had turned Sarajevo into a shooting gallery, and we were the targets. In the chaos, I saw Lena helping an elderly patient, her hands steady despite the fear in her eyes. Marco, the soldier from earlier, tried to sit up, clutching his bandaged chest, muttering curses through gritted teeth. When the barrage paused, mortars came in clusters. Like predatory packs, a tense silence fell, broken only by coughing and whimpers. Dr. Kovac rose first, assessing the damage. "Stairs are blocked," he said grimly, shining a flashlight up the narrow passage. Rubble had partially collapsed, trapping us in the basement. "We'll have to dig out, but carefully." Volunteers scrambled, using hands and improvised tools, shovels from the supply closet, even bed frames bent into picks. I joined them, my muscles aching from earlier exertions, but adrenaline pushed me on. Amra stayed with Selma, whispering comforts, her small voice a beacon in the gloom. As we cleared debris, stone by stone, the air grew thicker with dust, making every breath a struggle. Sweat stung my eyes, and my hands blistered against the rough concrete. That's when we heard it. Voices from above, muffled but urgent. Rescuers or something worse? In this war, help could turn hostile in an instant. Dr. Kovac signaled for quiet, and we listened. Footsteps crunching over rubble, then a call. "Anyone down there?" The accent was local, Bosnian, but trust was thin. "We're medics!" Kovac shouted back. "Wounded inside!" A pause, then more shifting, and light pierced through as they cleared from the other side. The first face that emerged was familiar, the man from earlier, his scarf still masking half his features, but those eyes, sharp and unreadable. He pushed through the gap, helping pull away larger chunks. "Hurry," he said, his voice strained. "More shells coming," my heart skipped. Why was he back? Kovac shot me a look, suspicion mirroring my own, but we had no choice. The basement was a tomb if we didn't get out. We worked together, the man heaving boulders with surprising strength, his rifle slung but ready. As the path cleared, we began evacuating the wounded, carrying them up one by one. Selma on a stretcher, Amra clinging to her, Marco hobbling with support, the others in various states of pain. Outside, the night air was a shock, cold and laced with smoke. The clinic's facade was cratered, windows shattered, but it stood, barely. The man directed us to a nearby building, an abandoned apartment block that offered better cover. "Safer there," he insisted, helping carry a stretcher. I walked beside him, questions burning. "Who are you?" I finally asked, my voice low. He glanced at me, a ghost of a smile under the scarf. "Someone who remembers what side he's on," he replied cryptically. But as we moved, I noticed his limp, fresh blood on his pant leg, a wound he hadn't had before. Had he been fighting? For whom? In the new shelter, we set up again, improvising with what we could salvage. The man stayed, binding his own injury without complaint, his presence a puzzle that deepened the night's mysteries. Whispers among the staff grew, ally or infiltrator. As I tended to new arrivals, victims of the mortar strike dragged in from the streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that his return was no coincidence. The war had a way of revealing truths in layers, each more painful than the last, and this night was peeling them back one by one. Little did I know, the storm outside was nothing compared to the revelations brewing within these walls. The new shelter was a hollowed-out apartment block, its walls pockmarked with bullet holes and graffiti scrawled in hasty defiance, messages of hope mixed with curses against the besiegers. We crammed into what used to be a living room, now a makeshift ward with blankets spread on the floor and candles guttering in corners. The air was stale, thick with the scent of unwashed bodies and fear, but it was better than the exposed clinic basement. Dr. Kovac directed the setup with quiet efficiency, assigning tasks like a general in retreat. Lena to distribute water from our dwindling reserves, another volunteer to monitor the critically wounded. I found myself bandaging the man's leg wound. His pant cuff rolled up to reveal a gash from shrapnel, jagged and inflamed. He winced as I cleaned it with the last of our alcohol swabs, but his eyes never left mine, steady and probing. "You're not from here," he observed, his voice low, almost conversational amid the groans around us. I shook my head, focusing on the task, wrapping gauze tightly to stem the ooze. "No, I'm not. Came to help," he chuckled, a dry sound without humor. "Help? In this? You're either brave or foolish." Maybe both, I thought, but said nothing. His tattoo was clearer now in the candlelight, an eagle clutching a cross, faded but unmistakable, the mark of Serb nationalists. My hands paused, and he noticed, his expression shifting to something resigned. Outside, the shelling had eased into sporadic bursts, like the war was catching its breath before the next assault. But inside, tension simmered. Whispers circulated among the staff, eyes darting to the man, hands hovering near improvised weapons, a crowbar here, a scalpel there. Kovac pulled me aside during a lull, his face etched with lines that seemed deeper in the dim light. "We can't keep him here," he murmured. "Too risky. If he's what we think—" I glanced back at the man, now helping adjust a patient's IV with surprising gentleness. "He saved Selma, helped us escape." Kovac's jaw tightened. "Wolves in sheep's clothing. I've seen it before, infiltrators gaining trust, then calling in coordinates." The doubt gnawed at me as I moved through the room, checking on patients. Amra was awake again, sitting by Selma, who stirred fitfully in her drugged sleep. The girl looked up at me with those big eyes, trusting, and I forced a smile. "She's going to be okay," I said, handing her a piece of bread from our rations. But as I turned, a new wave of wounded arrived, civilians caught in the crossfire, dragged in by neighbors risking their lives. A man with a gut wound screaming in agony, a woman clutching her arm, bone protruding like an accusation. We sprang into action, the room a blur of motion and blood. In the midst of it, the man approached Kovac, his limp pronounced but ignored. "I can stand watch," he offered. "Give your people a break." Kovac eyed him warily. "Why, what's your game?" The man sighed, lowering his voice so only we could hear. "No game. My name's Dragon. I was with them. The hills. Artillery spotter." The admission hung like smoke, and I felt the room tilt. Kovac's hand went to his pocket, where I knew he kept a pistol, scavenged from a fallen soldier. "Then why are you here?" I demanded, my voice sharper than intended. Dragan sat heavily on a crate, his face crumbling under the weight of whatever burdened him. "Because I couldn't anymore. Saw too much. Women, kids like her," he nodded toward Amra. "Orders came to shell Dobrinja tonight. Heavy. I defected. Warned who I could." His words spilled out, a confession in the candle flicker. He'd been part of the siege machinery, directing fire that turned homes to rubble, but a letter from his sister in the city, smuggled through lines, had cracked him. "She was here somewhere with a family. I helped you because I saw the girl. Reminded me of my niece." But there was more. He'd sabotaged his unit's radio before leaving, buying time, but they were closing in. Kovac didn't buy it fully, his suspicion a shield honed by betrayal. "Prove it." Dragan pulled a crumpled map from his jacket, marked with positions, artillery ranges. "This is their plan for dawn. Evacuate east, through the tunnel." The Sarajevo Tunnel, the lifeline under the airport runway, dug by hand to smuggle supplies and people. It was a secret, guarded fiercely, but if he knew. We pored over the map, Kovac's finger tracing lines, his face hardening with realization. It could be a trap, leading us into an ambush or salvation. As we debated in hushed tones, another explosion rocked the block, closer, shattering windows and sending glass shards flying. Patients cried out and dust choked the air. "They're adjusting fire," Dragan said grimly. "They know I'm gone." Panic rippled through the room. We had to move again. Organizing the evacuation was chaos. Stretchers reassembled, the able-bodied helping the weak, Amra hoisting her mother's arm over her shoulder despite her size. I grabbed my kit, slinging it across my back, and helped carry Marco, who grumbled but leaned on me. Dragan led the way, rifle in hand, scouting alleys for patrols. Trusting him felt like stepping on thin ice, but options were scarce. The streets were a labyrinth of destruction, moonlight filtering through clouds of smoke. We moved in a ragged line, hearts pounding with every shadow that might hide a sniper. Amra walked beside me, her hand in mine, small and determined. "Is he bad?" she whispered, glancing at Dragan. "I don't know," I admitted. "Sometimes people change." Halfway to the tunnel entrance, a concealed spot in a bombed-out factory, the crack of gunfire split the night. Ambush? No, Dragan firing at figures emerging from a side street. "Go!" he shouted, covering us as we ran. Bullets whizzed, pinging off walls, and one grazed my arm, a hot line of pain I ignored. We reached the entrance, a hidden hatch guarded by Bosnian fighters who eyed Dragan with hostility, but let us through on Kovac's word. Down into the earth we went. The tunnel a narrow vein of hope, wooden supports creaking under the weight above. It was claustrophobic, mud sucking at boots, the air damp and metallic. We shuffled forward, the wounded groaning with each step, Amra's breath quick beside me. Dragan brought up the rear, his face set, blood from his leg trailing behind. Had his confession been truth or manipulation? The question echoed in the dark. But for now, survival demanded we press on. The night wasn't done revealing its twists, and the tunnel's end held promises, or perils I couldn't yet fathom. The tunnel swallowed us whole, a narrow throat of earth that pressed in from all sides, turning the world above into a muffled rumble. It was barely wide enough for two people abreast, the ceiling so low I had to hunch, my back scraping against rough-hewn timbers that smelled of damp rot and desperation. Flashlights bobbed like fireflies, casting erratic shadows that danced mockingly on the walls. But mostly, we moved in blindness, guided by the shuffle of feet and the labored breaths of those around us. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of mud and sweat, and every inhale felt like drawing in the weight of the city itself. This was the lifeline of Sarajevo, dug by hand through months of toil, a secret vein connecting the besieged heart to the free world beyond the airport. But down here, it felt more like a grave, waiting to collapse and bury us with the secrets we'd carried in. Amra clung to my hand, her fingers icy despite the closeness, her steps small but determined. "Is it always this dark?" she whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. I squeezed her hand gently, forcing steadiness into my tone. Not always. We'll see light soon. Just keep walking. But truth be told, I wasn't sure. The tunnel stretched for over 3 kilometers, a marathon under fire, and we'd only just begun. Behind us, the group stretched out, Dr. Kovac leading with a map sketched from memory, Lena supporting an elderly woman who coughed wetly with each step, Marco limping but refusing help, his pride a stubborn companion. Selma was on a stretcher carried by 2 volunteers, her face pale but peaceful in unconsciousness, the morphine dulling the pain for now. My arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed it. A shallow furrow I'd bandaged hastily before entering, but the sting kept me alert, a reminder that danger wasn't left behind. Water dripped from cracks overhead, plinking into shallow puddles that soaked our boots, turning the floor into a slick mire. I slipped once, catching myself on the wall, dislodging a cascade of dirt that pattered down like rain. Amra gasped, pressing closer, and I murmured apologies, my heart racing not just from the fall, but from the fragility of it all. One wrong shift, one weakened support, and this escape route could become our tomb. I'd heard stories, sections caving in from shelling above, trapping dozens, their cries echoing until silence claimed them. We were rats in a burrow, scurrying from the cat's claws. As we progressed, conversations flickered like the lights, whispers of encouragement, shared cigarettes passed hand to hand. The acrid smoke a brief comfort. Dr. Kovac called back updates. Halfway? Maybe less. But time blurred in the dark. Minutes stretched into hours, the monotony broken only by the occasional groan from the wounded or a child's whimper. Amra started talking to fill the void, her voice a soft thread weaving through the tension. Before we had a garden, she said, with tomatoes. Mama made soup. I listened, nodding even though she couldn't see, picturing it, a normalcy shattered by the war's arbitrary hand. Sounds nice, I replied. We'll have gardens again. It was a promise I couldn't keep, but hope was currency down here, traded freely to keep despair at bay. Further back, I could sense Dragan's presence, his heavier steps, and the occasional mutter as he encouraged stragglers. Doubt still gnawed at me. His confession in the shelter had eased some suspicion, but trust was a fragile thing in war, rebuilt one act at a time. Kovac had pocketed the map without comment, but his glances backwards spoke volumes. What if Dragan was leading us into a dead end, or worse, signaling to his former comrades? The tunnel was patrolled at intervals, guards to prevent just that, but in the chaos of evacuation, protocols bent. I turned once, shining my light briefly, catching his silhouette, rifle slung, face set in grim resolve. Our eyes met, and he nodded, a silent acknowledgement that did little to quell the unease. Then it happened. A low rumble from above, vibrating through the tunnel like the growl of some subterranean beast. We froze, breaths held, as dirt sifted down in earnest. Shelling, someone whispered, and panic rippled through the line. The supports creaked ominously, a timber shifting with a crack that split the air. Keep moving! Kovac shouted, his voice steadying us. But ahead, a pile of debris blocked the path. Fresh collapse, rocks and mud tumbled from a weakened spot. We scrambled, hands clawing at the blockage, nails breaking, muscles straining. I dropped to my knees, shoving stones aside, Amra helping with her small hands, her face streaked with grime. Come on! I grunted, heaving a larger boulder, my wounded arm screaming in protest. Dragan pushed forward, his strength surprising, despite the limp, lifting chunks that would have taken 2 of us. Here, he said, directing efforts, his commands calm and precise. Together, we cleared enough for passage, but not without cost. A volunteer twisted his ankle in the scramble, adding to our burdens. As we squeezed through the gap, another tremor hit, sealing the way behind with a roar of falling earth. Shouts echoed. Had anyone been caught? No, miraculously, we were all through, but the tunnel felt even more precarious now, the air thicker with dust that coated lungs and throats. In the aftermath, we paused to catch breath, the darkness absolute without lights. Coughs racked the group, and I passed out water from canteens, rationing sips. Selma stirred on her stretcher, murmuring Amra's name, and the girl rushed to her side, tears mixing with sweat. I checked her vitals, pulse weak but steady, fever rising slightly. Infection, maybe? We needed proper care soon. We're almost out, I told Amra, though it was as much for me as her. Dragan knelt nearby, wiping blood from a fresh cut on his forehead. You did good back there, I said quietly, the words grudging but sincere. He looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes. Had to. For my own reasons, he elaborated then, voice low so others wouldn't hear. His sister, the one in the letter, had been killed weeks ago, caught in a market bombing he'd unwittingly helped target. The guilt had festered, turning obedience to rebellion. I thought defecting would balance the scales, he admitted, but it just adds more weight. His words hung heavy, a mirror to my own doubts. What good was saving one when so many were lost? The war wasn't black and white. It was shades of gray, smeared with blood. I didn't absolve him, but understanding bridged the gap, if only slightly. We pressed on, the tunnel sloping upward, a faint draft hinting at freedom. But echoes pursued us, distant booms, the scuffle of feet. Were we clear or hunted? The night above raged on, indifferent, and down here we carried its fury in our hearts. As light finally pierced the gloom ahead, a pinprick growing to promise, I felt the pull of what lay beyond. Safety, perhaps, or just another layer of hell. But for now, survival was enough, one step echoing into the unknown. The pinprick of light grew as we trudged forward, a beacon in the suffocating dark of the Sarajevo tunnel. It was faint at first, like a star struggling through a storm, but with each step, it widened, promising air that didn't choke, a sky that wasn't earth. My legs burned, my arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed it, and the weight of exhaustion pressed harder than the tunnel walls. Amra's hand was still in mine, her grip tight but faltering, her small frame trembling from cold and fear. Behind us, the group moved in a ragged line, Selma on her stretcher, her breathing shallow but steady. Marco cursing softly with each limping step. Lena supporting the elderly woman whose coughs echoed like warnings. Dragan brought up the rear, his rifle a silent sentinel, his eyes scanning the darkness we'd left behind. The tunnel's end was near, but so was the danger. The exit opened into Butmir, just beyond the airport runway, a no-man's land where Bosnian forces held a fragile line against the besiegers. Snipers and patrols roamed the hills, and the tunnel's secrecy was its only defense. If Dragan's betrayal of his unit had been discovered, they'd be waiting, hungry for blood, ours or his. The thought twisted my stomach, but there was no turning back. The collapse behind us had sealed that option, trapping us between hope and peril. I glanced at Amra, her face pale but resolute, and found strength in her quiet courage. Almost there, I whispered, more to myself than her. The air changed as we neared the exit, cooler, laced with the sharp scent of pine from the hills beyond. A Bosnian fighter stood guard at the mouth, his AK-47 ready, his face hard under a knit cap. "Papers!" he demanded, his voice low but firm. Dr. Kovac stepped forward, exchanging hushed words, showing a crumpled pass that marked us as medics and evacuees. The guard's eyes lingered on Dragan, narrowing at the rifle, the blood-streaked jacket. "Him?" he asked, jerking his head. Kovac hesitated, then vouched for him, his voice steady but laced with doubt. "He's with us. Helped us through." The guard grunted, unconvinced, but waved us out, warning of patrols in the area. Emerging from the tunnel was like breaking the surface after drowning. The night sky was vast, stars piercing through clouds of smoke, and the cold bit my face like a slap. But freedom was an illusion here. Open ground stretched to a cluster of trees, maybe 100 meters, and beyond that, a safe house run by volunteers smuggling supplies and people. We moved quickly, crouching low, the wounded carried or supported, our breaths clouding in the frigid air. The ground was uneven, littered with debris from past shelling, and every step felt exposed, as if eyes in the hills were tracking us through scopes. I held Amra close, shielding her with my body, my heart pounding with the memory of that bullet sparking near my foot earlier. Halfway across, a flare arced into the sky, bathing the landscape in sickly white light. We froze, dropping to the ground, hearts hammering. "Patrol!" Dragan hissed, crawling forward to peer over a ridge. His face tightened, and he signaled for silence. I pressed Amra into the dirt, her small body trembling beneath me, and listened. Voices, harsh, clipped, speaking in Serbo-Croatian, drifted on the wind, too close. Flashlights swept the area, beams cutting through the night like knives. Dragan motioned for us to stay low, then slithered forward, disappearing into the shadows. Was he betraying us now, signaling his old comrades? Or covering our escape? Doubt clawed at me, but survival demanded focus. Minutes stretched into eternity, the flare's light fading, leaving us in darkness again. Then, a burst of gunfire, short, controlled, from Dragan's direction. Shouts followed, chaotic, then silence. We waited, breaths held, until his silhouette reappeared, waving us forward. "Clear for now," he whispered, blood fresh on his hands, not his own. 2 scouts. Won't report back. Kovac's eyes narrowed, but he nodded, and we moved, scrambling toward the trees. My mind raced. Had Dragan killed to protect us, or to cover his tracks? His confession in the tunnel echoed. Guilt over his sister, rebellion against his orders. But trust was a gamble, and every step with him felt like rolling dice in the dark. The safe house was a squat, bullet-scarred building, once a farmer's cottage, now a hub for resistance and relief. Volunteers greeted us, their faces weary but warm, offering blankets and weak tea boiled over a makeshift stove. We settled the wounded in a cramped room, Selma laid on a cot, Amra curled beside her. I checked her vitals, fever holding, pulse steady but weak. Antibiotics were critical now, but the safe house was as bare as the clinic. "We'll get a truck to a hospital in Zenica by dawn," a volunteer promised. But dawn felt a lifetime away, and the roads were treacherous. Mined and patrolled. As we worked, distributing what little food there was, hard bread and watery soup, I overheard Dragan speaking with a Bosnian fighter, their voices low but heated. "You brought heat on us," the fighter accused, pointing at Dragan's tattooed arm, exposed now as he'd shed his jacket. "They'll come for you and we'll all pay." Dragan didn't flinch. "I gave you their plans. Use them." He handed over the crumpled map from earlier, its edges stained with blood. The fighter took it, reluctant, and stormed off to radio the information. I watched Dragan slump against a wall, his face etched with exhaustion, and felt a pang of something, pity, maybe, or understanding. War made monsters and martyrs of us all, and he was walking a line between both. A new sound broke the night. Engines, distant but growing louder. Trucks, tanks? Panic surged, and the safe house erupted into quiet chaos, volunteers dousing lights, fighters grabbing weapons. "They're coming," Dragan said, his voice flat, resigned. "My unit, or what's left of it." They know I turned. He stood, checking his rifle, and looked at me. "Get them out. I'll hold them off." Before I could protest, he was moving toward the door, a lone figure against the night. Kovac grabbed my arm. "Help load the wounded. We're leaving, now." We scrambled, lifting Selma, Marco, and others into a battered van, Amra helping despite her size. The engine roared to life and we piled in, the safe house fading behind us as gunfire erupted, Dragan's stand buying us time. I clutched Amra, her face buried in my chest, and prayed the van would outrun whatever hunted us. The road was a blur of ruts and shadows, every jolt threatening to undo our fragile escape. Dragan's fate hung like a specter, his sacrifice or betrayal another unanswered question in this endless night. Ahead lay Zenica, a hospital, maybe safety. But the war wasn't done with us, and its truths were still unraveling, sharp as shrapnel in the dark. The van rattled along the broken road, its engine coughing like a sick animal. Each jolt sending pain through my wounded arm and shaking the fragile hope we clung to. I sat in the back, pressed against the cold metal wall, Amra nestled against me, her small body shivering despite the blanket I'd wrapped around her. Selma lay on a makeshift pallet beside us, her breathing uneven, her face slick with feverish sweat. The other wounded, Marco, the elderly woman, a boy with burns, groaned with every bump. Their pain a chorus that drowned out the distant gunfire fading behind us. Dr. Kovac rode up front with the driver, a wiry volunteer named Emir, who gripped the wheel like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to sanity. The road to Zenica was a gauntlet of checkpoints, mines, and roving militias. And we were racing against time, Selma's time, and maybe our own. The night was a blur outside the cracked windows. Trees and hills swallowed by darkness, punctuated by flashes of artillery far off. The safe house was gone now, left behind with Dragon's stand, his rifle bursts echoing in my mind like a question I couldn't answer. Had he bought us this escape, or was it another layer of his game? His map, now in Kovac's hands, had given us a route, avoiding the main roads where Serb forces patrolled. But trust was a frayed thread, and every shadow outside could be an ambush. I tightened my grip on Amra, her warmth grounding me, her whispered prayers for her mother, a reminder of why I kept moving. Emir swerved to avoid a crater, cursing under his breath. "Mines," he muttered, eyes scanning the road. "They plant them at night, move them by morning." Kovac unfolded the map, squinting in the dim glow of a flashlight. "Stay east of the river," he said, tracing a line. Dragon marked a path through the old logging trails. Less chance of patrols. The name hung heavy, and I caught Emir's glance in the rearview mirror, sharp with suspicion. "If he's telling the truth," Emir said, "could be leading us straight to them." Kovac didn't reply, his silence louder than words. I wanted to believe Dragon, to cling to the hope of his redemption. But war taught you to question everything, even acts of courage. The van hit a rut and Selma moaned, her hand twitching toward Amra. I checked her pulse, weak. Too fast, and adjusted the bandage on her thigh, the gauze damp with fresh blood. "She needs antibiotics," I said to no one in particular, my voice tight. The boy with burns whimpered nearby, his arm wrapped in cloth that smelled of singed flesh. I handed him a sip of water, rationing what little we had, and caught Marco's eye. He was propped against the opposite wall, his chest wound seeping through the bandages, but he managed a grim nod. "Keep going, kid," he rasped. "You're doing better than most." His words were a lifeline, thin but enough to pull me through the moment. Then it came, a flicker of light ahead, not artillery but headlights, cutting through the trees. Emir killed our own lights, slowing to a crawl. "Checkpoint?" Kovac whispered, reaching for a pistol tucked under his seat. My heart sank. Checkpoints could mean Bosnian defenders, but just as easily militias or deserters, profiting from the chaos. Emir eased the van off the trail, behind a thicket, and we held our breath as the lights grew closer. Voices carried, laughter rough, not friendly. I peered through a crack in the van's side, spotting 3 figures, rifles slung casually, cigarettes glowing like tiny fires. Their accents were thick, local but not ours, Serb, maybe, or opportunists wearing no flag. "We can't fight," Emir said softly. "Too many wounded." Kovac nodded, calculating. "Wait them out. They might move on." But the voices grew louder, boots crunching closer, and I felt Amra tense, her breath hitching. I covered her mouth gently, whispering, "Quiet now, brave girl." The wounded were silent, sensing the danger, even Marco biting back his pain. The headlights swept over our hiding spot, and I saw the glint of a rifle barrel. If they found us, packed with wounded, no papers to prove our neutrality, it could be a massacre, or worse. A bargaining chip for whoever held the most guns. Then, a crackle from the darkness, a radio, static-laced, calling the men back. One argued, spitting into the dirt, but they retreated, their lights fading as they moved down the road. We waited, minutes stretching, until silence returned. Emir exhaled, restarting the engine. "Luck," he muttered, but I wasn't so sure. Dragon's map had kept us off the main routes, but had he known about this patrol? Was it coincidence, or had his sabotage left gaps in their net? The questions piled up, heavy as the bodies we carried. We pressed on, the trail narrowing, branches scraping the van like skeletal fingers. Amra fell asleep again, her head heavy against my shoulder, and I envied her escape into dreams. My own mind churned, images of Dragan at the safe house, his bloodied hands, his confession. I'd seen his guilt, raw and real, but war twisted truth until it was unrecognizable. Had he saved us to atone or to survive? The van lurched over a rise, and Zenika's lights flickered in the distance, a hospital, safety, a chance to save Selma and the others. But the road stretched on, and each mile felt like a gamble. A new sound broke my thoughts. A low drone, mechanical, overhead. "A plane? No, too small," A drone, maybe, or a helicopter scouting the night. Kovac cursed, and Emir accelerated, the van groaning under the strain. They're hunting, Kovac said, glancing at the map. Dragan's unit, or someone tipped off. The implication was clear. If Dragan had betrayed his comrades, they'd be scouring for him, and we were collateral. I tightened my hold on Amra, checking Selma's pulse again, willing her to hang on. The hospital was close, but so was danger, and the night seemed to tighten its grip, as if reluctant to let us go. We hit a clearing, the van's tires spinning in mud, and for a moment we were stuck, wheels churning uselessly. Panic surged, open ground exposed, the drone's hum louder now. Volunteers leapt out, pushing, digging with bare hands, while I stayed with the wounded, whispering encouragements. Marco, despite his pain, growled, "Get us out, or I'll walk it myself." His defiance sparked a grim smile, and we heaved. The van lurching free just as the drone's light swept nearby, missing us by meters. We dove back in, speeding toward Zenica, the city's outline growing clearer. But as we neared, a new fear gripped me. The hospital would be a haven, but what of Dragan? If he survived, would he find us? And if he did, would he bring salvation or doom? The night held its secrets close, and as the van's headlights caught the first signs of Zenica, barricades. A Red Cross flag tattered but standing, I felt the weight of those unanswered questions, heavy as the lives we carried, pressing us toward an uncertain dawn. The van's headlights cut through the pre-dawn gloom, illuminating the barricades at Zenica's edge like jagged teeth guarding the city. Emir eased off the accelerator, his knuckles white on the wheel as Bosnian soldiers emerged from the shadows, rifles leveled, faces stern under helmets scarred by battle. "Papers!" one demanded, his voice rough from cigarettes and lack of sleep. Kovac handed over our makeshift IDs, scrawled notes from the resistance, stamps faded but authentic, and explained our cargo, wounded from Sarajevo, medics on the run. The soldier peered into the back, his flashlight sweeping over us, lingering on Selma's pale face, Amra's wide eyes, Marco's bandaged chest. He nodded finally, waving us through with a grunt. "Hospital straight on. Godspeed." Zenica was a haven compared to the siege, but war's fingerprints were everywhere. Buildings pocked with shell holes, streets empty except for patrols, the air heavy with the smell of coal smoke from factories turned to wartime production. The hospital loomed ahead, a Soviet-era block fortified with sandbags, its windows taped against blasts. We pulled up to the emergency entrance, tires crunching on gravel, and the doors burst open as nurses and doctors swarmed out, alerted by radio. "Incoming wounded!" Kovac shouted, and we unloaded, stretchers clattering, voices overlapping in urgent commands. Selma was first, wheeled inside on a gurney, Amra trotting beside, her hand clutching her mother's. I followed, my legs leaden, the graze on my arm pulsing with every heartbeat. Inside, the hospital was a whirlwind of activity, corridors lined with cots, the tang of disinfectant warring with blood and sweat. Doctors in scrubs, stained from endless shifts, assessed the arrivals. Selma to surgery for her leg, Marco to X-ray for his chest, the boy with burns to an isolation ward to prevent infection. I helped where I could, relaying histories, holding hands as needles pierced veins. Amra stayed with me, her small form a shadow, until a nurse took her to a waiting area with hot tea and a blanket. "She's strong," the nurse said, patting my shoulder. "Like her mother." I nodded, but strength felt hollow now, a mask over the fractures war carved into us all. As the adrenaline ebbed, exhaustion crashed in, and I slumped in a chair, my mind replaying the night like a broken film reel, the rubble in Sarajevo, Dragan's enigmatic help, the tunnel's claustrophobic grip, the road's perils. Kovac joined me, his face gray with fatigue, handing over a cup of weak coffee. "We made it," he said, but his tone was flat, victory tainted. "Thanks to him?" I asked, the question heavy. Kovac shrugged, pulling out Dragan's map, now annotated with our route. Radio chatter says a skirmish at the safe house. Bodies found Serbs and one defector. Tattoo matched. He paused, eyes meeting mine. He held them off. Bought us hours. The news hit like a delayed explosion. Confirmation of Dragon's sacrifice mingled with the sting of his past sins. He'd been a cog in the machine of destruction, directing fire that orphaned children like Amra. Yet in the end, he'd chosen redemption, paying with his life. Was it enough? Could one act erase a ledger of blood? I thought of Marco's dying words about forgiving his brother. The divides war drew and sometimes bridged. Dragon's ghost lingered, a reminder that humanity persisted in the darkest corners. Flawed and flickering, hours blurred as dawn broke. Pale light filtering through windows, casting long shadows across the ward. I checked on Selma, out of surgery, stable, her leg saved but scarred. Amra slept beside her, curled like a comma, her face peaceful for the first time that night. Marco was resting, his prognosis good, bantering weakly with nurses. The elderly woman coughed less, antibiotics working their magic. We'd saved them, or at least given them a fighting chance. But the cost echoed in empty spaces. Friends lost in the siege, families shattered. A city bleeding. A radio in the corner crackled with news. More shelling in Sarajevo. Ceasefires crumbling, the world watching but not acting. I turned it off, unable to bear the detachment. Instead, I stepped outside, the cold air a shock after the tunnel's damp. The sun rose over the hills, indifferent, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold that mocked the gray below. Birds sang, a sound almost forgotten in the chaos. And for a moment, hope flickered, life persisting. Resilient, but the night had changed me, etched lessons in bone. Courage wasn't grand gestures, but small choices in the dark, survival a tapestry of loss and grace. Dragon's twist, from enemy to ally, unraveled my certainties, showing war's truths weren't simple, but layered, human. As I returned inside, ready to help again, I carried that weight, a survivor among survivors. The worst night behind, but its shadows long. As the sun climbed higher over Zenica, casting a golden haze that softened the edges of the scarred landscape, I stood outside the hospital, watching the world stir back to life. Nurses changed shifts, their footsteps echoing in the corridors like the faint pulse of a city refusing to die. Amra was inside, holding her mother's hand as Selma opened her eyes for the first time since the surgery, a weak smile breaking through the pain. Marco was already joking with the doctors, his resilience a testament to the unbreakable spirit that war tried, and failed, to crush. The boy with burns slept peacefully under clean sheets, and the elderly woman breathed easier, her cough subdued by medicine that had seemed like a distant dream just hours ago. We'd made it through the night, a ragged band of survivors pulled from the jaws of hell, but the victory felt hollow, laced with the ghosts of those we couldn't save. That night in Sarajevo, 1993, wasn't just a sequence of horrors, it was a mirror held up to the human soul, reflecting back the raw, unfiltered truth of what we become when everything is stripped away. I ran through streets turned to slaughterhouses, digging through rubble with bleeding hands, making choices that haunted me long after the guns fell silent. Amra's cry in the dark, Selma's fading pulse under my fingers, Dragon's enigmatic gaze as he vanished into the shadows. These weren't just moments. They were etchings on my heart, permanent scars that reminded me how fragile life is, how one decision can ripple out to save or doom. But the deepest cut was Dragon's story, a man torn between loyalties, his defection a desperate grasp at redemption in a world that offered none. He started as an enemy, directing the fire that rained death on innocence, yet ended as our shield, his blood buying our escape. Was he a hero or a villain? The war blurred those lines, teaching me that truth isn't black and white. It's a spectrum of grays, painted in the blood of the fallen. In the quiet hours after dawn, as I washed the grime from my skin in a basin of cold water, fragments of memory assaulted me. The weight of the beam as we lifted it from Selma, the choking dust in the tunnel, the whine of bullets in the night air. Each one carried a lesson. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but the defiance of it. Survival demands not just strength, but the willingness to see humanity in the enemy. Dragon's confession echoed in my mind, his guilt over his sister a mirror to my own doubts. Had I done enough? Could I have saved more? The questions lingered like smoke after a fire, acrid and unrelenting. But in Amra's eyes, as she looked up at me with gratitude, I saw a spark of hope, a child's trust that the world could heal even if the wounds ran deep. That night changed me, forging a resolve to keep fighting, not with guns, but with hands that healed, voices that remembered. War isn't just battles on maps or statistics in headlines. It's the intimate destruction of lives, the shattering of families, the erosion of souls. In Sarajevo, I witnessed the worst of humanity, the senseless hatred that turned neighbors into killers, the indifference of the world that let a city bleed for years. But I also saw the best. Strangers risking everything for a child they didn't know, defectors turning against their own for a chance at atonement, medics like Kovac who stitched hope into despair. The Bosnian War, with its ethnic fractures and siege horrors, exposed the fragility of peace, how quickly civilization crumbles under the weight of division. Yet in the ruins, resilience bloomed. People sharing bread in bomb shelters, artists painting murals on blasted walls, survivors like me carrying stories that refused to be silenced. That night was my crucible, burning away illusions, leaving behind a truth. We are all capable of darkness and light, and survival hinges on choosing the latter, even when the cost is everything. Reflecting now, years removed from the rubble, I realized that night wasn't the end, it was a beginning. It taught me that secrets buried in conflict, like dragons' hidden remorse or the unspoken bonds formed in chaos, reveal the core of who we are. The disturbing truth I uncovered wasn't just about war's brutality, but its power to transform, turning victims into warriors, enemies into allies, despair into defiance. What if the person you hate holds the key to your survival? What hidden strengths lie dormant until tested by fire? These questions, planted in the heart of that nightmare, grew into a life dedicated to remembering, to ensuring such horrors aren't forgotten. Sarajevo's siege lasted 425 days, claiming over 11,000 lives, but the stories of those who endured are the real weapons against oblivion, narratives that challenge us to confront the human condition, to question our own capacity for compassion or cruelty. And you, listener, you've journeyed with me through this dark tunnel, reliving the explosions, the blood, the betrayals and redemptions. Not everyone has the stomach for it. Many turn away from the raw edges of truth, preferring the comfort of ignorance. But you've stayed, breath held, heart pounding until the dawn broke. Congratulations, you're part of a rare circle, those with the fortitude to face the unvarnished reality of war, to let it seep into your bones and change you. You've earned that badge of courage, proving you're not afraid to stare into the abyss and see the flickers of humanity staring back. Now, I invite you to seal this connection. Drop into the comments and type, "This story changed the way I see war." By doing so, you're not just sharing words, you're declaring yourself one of the committed, a guardian of these testimonies that pierce the veil of forgetfulness. Your comment weaves you into our community, a network of souls unafraid to grapple with the shadows of history, to honor the voices that echo from the front lines. Together, we build a fortress against denial, ensuring these stories ripple out, touching more hearts, sparking more reflections. But don't stop there. The power is in your hands to amplify this truth. Share this video far and wide. Let it spread like whispers in the night, infiltrating feeds and conversations so that others might stumble upon it and be drawn into the same transformative journey. Imagine it as a hidden mine in the field of complacency, detonating awareness where it's needed most, exposing the silenced realities that powers try to bury under layers of propaganda and time. Subscribe to the channel. Think of it as stepping into a labyrinth of untold tales, where each video is a thread leading deeper into the mysteries of survival, the enigmas of the human spirit amid chaos. It's like joining a secret society of truth seekers, where the unsettling metaphors of war, bombs as heartbeats, rubble as memories, become your companions, urging you to question, to empathize, to act. By subscribing, you're arming yourself against the erosion of history, becoming a sentinel in the watchtower, vigilant for the stories that could reshape our understanding of conflict and resilience. Keep watching. Let your curiosity be the flame that illuminates these dark corners. Dive into the next video and the next, feeding that hunger for the disturbing, the real, the profoundly human. Because in remembering the worst nights, we honor the dawn that follows, and ensure that the lessons of Sarajevo, of every war-torn soul, live on, not as distant echoes, but as living, breathing calls to our better selves. Thank you for being here, for listening, for carrying this story forward. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay human.